Om Mantranam Jivabhuta Tuya Smrita Shakti Rupaya Tatahina Vadarohe Nishvalaha Sharda Bravat Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. She, who the saints, seers, and sages remember as the imperishable Shakti, is the deep meaning in all the sutras and slokas of the religious traditions and scriptures of the world. Without her, O fair one, all the tattvas, the principles of nature, are about as useful as clouds with no rain. She is the perfect I consciousness, existing in all the multitude of words, and the secret of all the mantras, whose very being is the essence of non-dual awareness. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste from SRV Loka, aloha from Hawaii. We are now on the heels of Guru Purnima, having just passed through that auspicious holy day a few days ago. And prior to that, the auspicious Mahasamadhi of Swami Vivekananda on, symbolically enough, July the 4th. Therefore, echoing that note of highest freedom that he brought, called moksha, or mukti, or kaivalya. In India, there are many names for it. Even yoga, if you take that to the ultimate, or advaita, the non-dual state. And kaivalya, according to the ancients. So with all of those high and heady principles of Mother India, we go on presenting the Dharma. And in that period of 4th July and Guru Purnima, we looked over 3 weeks at that powerful subject of the will to live a spiritual life. So I was deliberating and thinking what could follow up a series like that. And it seemed like a good connecting point would be this topic that we're about to present in the next 3 weeks. That's the memory, or Smriti, and its role in the mind and in reincarnation. So I could have named the series Reincarnation and Rebirth, and it would have worked fine. But I wanted to accent more the problems and the solution, rather than just the Dharma teachings that probably many have heard for a long time. Although I must say that to hear something and to accept it really seem to be two different things, particularly in our Western way of thinking, because we have science competing with this idea that matter is neither destructible or indestructible, it's unoriginated, as my teacher used to say. And then we have religion on the other side with its creation theory. And so both of these have gotten into the mind of Western thinking for many, many centuries. I'm talking about several millennia or more. And in all of this time, for millennia previous to that, India has been thinking all in terms of ajativada, non-birth and non-death of the soul, and aparinama, non-transformation, that reality doesn't transform. So if you are to take these two principles, which started off as Purusha and Prakriti in the oldest times, Samkhya Yoga, later on got taken up by the Tantrists as Shiva and Shakti, eventually even metamorphosed into what we're talking about now in terms of Brahman and its Maya, because we can't leave Maya as its own principle because it's not sentient. So it's what flummoxes us, no doubt, and it's closely associated with the ancient principle of Prakriti, or nature, which is always, at least seemingly, transforming all the time. So that means we're going to have to put into place some supports for philosophy that have been either left out or taken out by science and religion over so many centuries and millennia. In the case of India, it just has to remember them. And so that's really what we're focusing on today. Smriti. If the memory is healthy and resilient, then it's called Daiva Smriti. It's a divine memory of who you truly are. And that really sums up enlightenment right there, doesn't it? Because it's not enough just to ask, who am I? And pretty soon sound like an owl, as I like to say, ad nauseum. But you have to actually verify this I, find out what it is. And that's going to take some separating out of the wheat from the chaff, or some viveka and vairagya, as we know is the case with the Indian seers, to discriminate between that which is unchanging and that which is changing, and then to detach from the changing. These are very important points of practice, which will lead us back to yoga, not just yoga as practice, which is necessary, but yoga as presence, yoga as perfection. So in that way, path and practice and perfection go together in India's way of thinking. And it's all based upon this one unchanging reality, which there are many names for, as I just said, and the states that come about, or maybe the one state that comes about. But if you look into the father of yoga's teachings, you'll see that it has many different kinds of samadhis, some lower, some middling, some higher. But it all impinges upon the mind to make itself qualified for these states. And so practice is for the mind. So in the Avadhuta Gita, for instance, we have that beautiful sloka which says, Sadanga yoga natu naiva shuddham. That is, you cannot purify the self by the practice of yoga. And Guru Padesham natu naiva shuddham. Guru's feet, Guru Padesham. You can't purify the soul by bowing at the Guru's feet. And then mano manasham, that is mind vinasham, mano vinasham, the mind's waves, destroying them. Vinasha means to destroy. You can't get the self pure by that method either. So basically you're talking right there, three very powerful methods, aren't you? Vyapya yoga, when you're bowing to the Guru's feet and worshiping. And then destroying the mind's wave, which sounds very much like the highest Vedanta and the highest Buddhism. And then yoga, practice of yoga, the Sadanga yoga, the six limb yoga, because limbs 1 and 2 are taken as a matter of course, yamas and yams. But the six limb yoga also can't purify the soul, and that's because the soul is always and ever pure. It's ever free, never bound, as Vivekananda coined that phrase for us when he was here early. So all of this getting us ready for this next class series that has to do with awakening the memory of, that's what I was just saying, Daiva Smriti. If you look at it from the problematic side, then most of the world is under the press of Vismriti, means forgetfulness. That is, the memory is not retentive. I often use the example of my teacher reciting the Gita by heart in his 90s. So that's not something that's very usual, but it is something that's going to lead him, follow him into any further lifetimes he might care to take. If he was a Jivan Mukta, as some of us thought he was, a living liberated soul, then he will have that impressed upon his mind. In Muslim religion, those surahs of the Quran flow across the inner chambers of the mind in letters of molten gold. That's a quote right out of that scripture. So it's not something that you're going to forget. You look inside, the first thing you see is not a lot of sentimental memories, not a lot of fear of the past, not a lot of hope for the future, not a lot of wasting time in the present. But what you see is what's eternal, and that's written across your very soul. So that's retentive memory, divine memory, Smriti, and as opposed to Vismriti. So that's why I was saying I could have named this class series Teachings on Reincarnation and Rebirth, but we wanted to name it and said the role of memory in rebirth. So I have a chart that I've created, of course I do, for this series, and we'll look at it in a minute because it's new, but the main chart I'm using is a chart that was created some months ago for a seminar that we all undertook about this kind of subject. It was really about how to extract essence from everyday life, how to get essence out of everything you do, everything you think, everything that you eat, everything that you perceive, how to extract essence out of that and get what Vivekananda called exquisite pleasure out of everything. It's not like the yogi or even the sannyasin doesn't know about pleasure and pain. They've gone to great lengths to be able to transcend that duality. It's one of the most base of all dualities. That is the mohena that Krishna talks about in the Gita. So dvandva mohena, he calls it, these deluding pairs of opposites. So the sannyasa knows about that, but knows also, because of the practice of yoga, that all objects are infilled with the underlying presence of bliss. That is, the foundation for it all is bliss. And that's why they name themselves Ananda. So many last names of Ananda in the world amongst the sannyasins. So in that way, we want to look at this divine memory and what opposes it, Vismriti. And so I think when you're talking about rebirth in the West, it's quite interesting to notice the deer in the headlights effect. People kind of, the eyes glass over, their mouths drop a little bit, and they're trying to comprehend this relative principle of reincarnation. First question that would come up in people who have been influenced by Zen schools or Buddhist schools, what is it that's incarnating? The first question you'd hear. It's just like for us in Advaita Vedanta. The first thing you'd hear when Westerners hear about this I, this perfect I that I just chanted about. She is the perfect I consciousness existing in everything. First thing that would come up for people like that would be, who am I? So whether you're talking about who am I or whether you're talking about what is it that incarnates, time to get over those. We've heard enough about reincarnation, it's time to accept it. And when I call it a relative law, then that should give a clue to this other question that's going to start cropping up in people's head. What is it that reincarnates? So in order to preempt or to pre-satisfy this question, then I want to present these series of classes in terms of what is it that reincarnates, where is it that is reincarnating, and how does it reincarnate? So we're going to have to go back into these why, where, when, what, and how questions. The who question is built in, that thou art. at least in Vedanta. So in this way, I think in order to give it some real credence in our minds, help us accept it more. I've noticed that you can speak about rebirth, as I've been saying, to Westerners, and they kind of get that glassy look, and they don't quite know how to put this together. So it's very hard to convince them. They might say, yes, overall, I believe in it, but most anyone would say, well, no, I haven't seen my past lifetime, so I can't prove this to myself. And you can't convince me of it because I haven't seen my past lifetimes. And there's a certain practicality, it must be admitted, to just concentrating on this one lifetime and doing the best you can. But philosophically speaking and psychologically speaking, it's going to be a great aid to the soul to remember the past existences that it's gone through. So I was thinking the best way to start the series then, in order to be more convincing, is to read from the one being who everyone listens to when they talk about reincarnation. Sri Krishna in the Gita can talk about reincarnation and everyone accepts it, point of fact, on the spot. And it's done with such naturalness and such authority that people sit and listen to the Gita and you don't hear a chirp afterwards. You don't hear a word or a word of complaint say, hey, teachings on reincarnation went by. I don't believe in those. You never hear that. They'll say that Gita, that's a marvelous scripture. I want to hear that again. I want to study it with a teacher. So I will read a few things by Sri Krishna about reincarnation very briefly, just a couple slokas. You know the scene. Arjuna has fallen into vishada. He's very depressed, seeing all these great beings in front of him. Krishna is there, watching him fall into dejection. And the minute that the dejection has been explained, why he's dejected, Krishna steps forward in this Samkhya Yoga chapter and calls down the reasoning of Arjuna. He says, you're actually speaking words of wisdom, but in the wrong situation, wrong context. This is not the time to be weak or to talk about nonviolence. It's upon you now. This is no time to turn tail and run. You should have done that far before, but we've tried to mediate with evil-minded beings, like the Kaurava clan, and it hasn't done us any good. So now our backs to the wall. We have to go into this battle, and we have to do it in the most fearless and righteous of all ways. So immediately he steps forward and says, to get through to Arjuna, he says, nor I, nor you, nor any of these princes that you see before you on the battlefield was ever non-existent. Nor is it that they shall cease to be in the future. So here's immediately at the very beginning of the Gita, non-origination, ajativata. Your soul never had a beginning. There was never a time it didn't exist. And there'll never come a time when it'll go non-existent, like into some void or into some vacuous state where it doesn't remember itself. Remember, now we're talking about this in the context of Smriti. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu Smriti rupena stitha. She exists in the hearts and minds of all beings as divine memory. So they need to think about her, as I just chanted at the beginning of this class, and have her restore their divine memory by thoughts of reality alone. To quote the Upanishads. He goes on, the indweller in the body experiences childhood, youth, old age in the body, also passes on to another body. The serene one is not affected by this. So you can't hear a sloka like that and all of a sudden say, what is it that's reincarnating? Because he answers it right there. The serene one is the one that's not reincarnated. And he's seeing the mind transmigrate from body to body. He says it right there. From old age in the body, starting with childhood to youth, and onwards to leaving that body. The serene one is the one that's witnessing that. So you have to read into the sloka deeper than most people would take you. That's right there at the very beginning of the Gita, chapter 2. He's talking about ajativada, the birthless, deathless state, the witness, the observer. And that's as much as I want to read of that chapter. Then at the beginning of chapter 4, where he's talking about jnana and karma, he says, I taught this yoga. He says this to Arjuna, I taught this yoga to Vivasvat. Vivasvat taught it to Manu. Manu taught it to Ikshvaku. Thus transmitted in regular succession, the royal sages came to know it. This yoga, by long efflux of time, began to decay in this world, Arjuna. So he's talking about an eternal truth, this imperishable yoga that he got lifetimes ago from Vivasvat. Now Arjuna knows that Vivasvat's a very ancient sage, very ancient luminary in India. So hoary and so timeless that you can't even, like we can hardly trace our memory back to Krishna now. At the time of Krishna, they couldn't trace their memories back to Ikshvaku and Manu. They were just names. And they knew that they were enlightened souls. So Krishna goes on to say, the same ancient yoga has been told to you today by me. For you are my devotee and friend, and this is the supreme secret. So this imperishable yoga, by which a being comes to know that there's an observer to the birth, life, death, rebirth process, which Buddha called samsara, and which we call cycles of time and space, name and form, and karma as repercussion. This is being declared to you, Arjuna, right now by me, who knows this. Arjuna has a complaint right away. I can hear some of my students. They'll probably write me tonight, and I hope they won't say, what is it that incarnates, Babaji? Because it's going to become very clear what it is that incarnates, and where it incarnates, and why it incarnates and reincarnates. We'll get to that with some of these charts. But Arjuna has a question of his own. Later was your birth. Earlier was the birth of Vivasvat. How then am I to understand that you said it in the beginning? So Arjuna's in that time on the battlefield of Kurukshetra has not practiced or known yoga yet. His brother has, Yudhishthira, but Arjuna is the one that's getting the grace of Sri Krishna on the battlefield. He's the one that's there facing off with this problem of violence and nonviolence, and having to go to war with people that early on he said here, these beings I'm going to war with, they should be worshipped. I should be worshiping them. And I did when I was young. So this is the predicament he's fallen into. So how am I to understand, Krishna, that you told me this? Sorry, this is sounding a little bit like a Gita discourse, but this is starting us off on this subject of Daiva Smriti and Vismriti. So how am I to know that when his birth was a lot earlier than yours? How did you get it from him? Yours was much later. And here's the great answer. Many are the births taken by me and you, Arjuna. I know them all, while you know them not. So we could go into the following slokas, and that would be a very wonderful way to describe the unborn. But that's not where we're going with this. The question is, why aren't we remembering? Why isn't our memory remembering our past lifetimes? And why can't we recall them right now in our meditation, as you're supposed to do in meditation? Sometimes it just happens naturally that people recall their lives in meditation. Sometimes in action they recall facets of their life. I've been here before kind of thing, or how did I know this when I've never heard anyone speak it? This is kind of what's going through Arjuna's mind when Krishna, puts the coffin nail in that one. I know all my births of the past, but you know them not, Arjuna. You haven't had that experience yet, because the practice of yoga is going to be necessary for that. So Krishna's memory is perfect. Now, there are people in India today who can trace their heritage through all their ancestors back to the time of Sri Krishna. So in India, this has been something that's just been ongoing. These strands have not been broken. These connections have not been rent asunder. People are thinking all these centuries and millennia before Christ about their connection to divine beings. These are their spiritual parents. You look at your family, you say, these are my earthly parents. But you have to then look at these great souls, like Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. I look at them every day on my altar, and I think, these are my spiritual parents. These who I bow to, these who I revere, these, I put myself in their hands. And this is bhakti yoga, this is worship that is based upon my memory and the knowledge of my memory that Brahman is the only reality and the world is unreal, if you want to put it in a Vedantic way of saying. So, like I say, he goes on and right away and says, I am the unborn, the imperishable, and the Lord of all beings. I subjugate nature, and then I come into being by my own Maya. You see, that takes us off into this beautiful chapter 4 and its conclusions and all the descriptions about the unborn. What is that? It's ajati again. So from chapter to chapter, the unborn, undying nature of the soul is being talked about, but it's on the battlefield of reincarnation that it's being talked about. So that's why we forget our divine nature in the midst of all this action. Rajas makes us forget it. As I just said, some scientific discoveries come along and make us forget it. Somebody looking up in the sky, studying the planets, come along, makes us forget it. Somebody watching an apple fall from a tree and discovering gravity makes us forget it. So all of this phenomena that's going on is all there, dancing in front of the five senses, who are completely duped by appearances, to forget the one reality by which they came into birth, and through which they'll live their life, and through which they'll reincarnate again until they've perfected themselves and don't need to return to earth anymore. I could go to the back of the chapter and tell you, actually it's on this chart. Let's just look at the chart. So I hope I've made my point here to start, that the authority about not only the non-dual self, but about this fourfold round of birth, life, death, and rebirth. See, out of the first of that birth would come six others, right? Birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. Those are called the six transformations. Well, Brahman doesn't transform. Sorry, kids. So you can't apply those six transformations to yourself. You don't. Those happen in nature. In my prakriti, he says, in my maya, I subjugated it all, you see. So you can't apply those. That birth is divine. So that's a divine birth you're talking about. When you get one of those in Buddhism, you're a bodhisattva. When you get one of those in Vedanta, you're a jivan mukta. And that puts all dreaming to sleep. My teacher used to say that. You must put dream to sleep. You must make fear afraid of itself. You must put death in its own grave. So talk about authorities sitting and listening to him day by day, month by month, year after year, on the podium, delivering these Vedantic truths, pierced through all of these sticky strands of the web that both the spider and the insect get caught in. See, the spider due to attachment to the web, the insect due to ignorance. So you have to cut those sticky strands. This Buddha is speaking, by the way, in the Dhammapada. I saw the house, the architect was me. Finally, I saw I was architect. Then I sundered the rafters. I split the ridgepole He's using architectural language out of the time and telling everyone how he broke down the body-mind mechanism. It's the body-mind mechanism that's doing the transmigrating. But it's doing it under the soul's behest. The soul's always the witness. Now, if you remember the witness and you are the witness, then that's a play. If you don't remember the witness, then that's Maya. That's grounds for forgetfulness. That's grounds for Smriti, an unhealthy memory. That's grounds for many, many lifetimes, again and again. That's grounds for being born on the battlefield of Kurukshetra with an impossible situation to handle, which is Arjuna's fate right now in the Gita. So we've taken some great authority there, Sri Krishna, to really get us serious about this relative principle of rebirth. It's not an absolute law because the soul does not get reborn. And that's why I chanted, not by bowing to the Guru's feet, not by destroying the mind's wave in meditation, and not by practicing the 6-yam yoga can you purify the self. It's already pure. Accept it. So then from that acceptance, ask the question, what is it that's reincarnating? And that's what we're about to look at here. Now, I put together this dire effects of Smriti chart some months ago. You remember maybe in the, I think it was in the extracting essence that I showed it, that seminar we were all into. So this is very explanatory and it's very intricate. We're going to go through it all, but I'm not going to take you through it right now. What I did was I diluted it here down to this new chart that I got done with yesterday and printed out. So let's look at a more friendly and easily comprehensible version of the Smriti chart, which will take us deeper into the reasons for loss of memory. So you understand, Arjuna has lost his memory of past lifetimes. He's caught completely off guard by this battle. Probably his brother isn't, you see, Yudhishthira. But he's also, of course, standing back in wonder at the Maya of it all, how this ever transpired, how this happened, because he was responsible for losing the kingdom, basically. So his actions are also fraught with this karma. Everyone who enters into this embodied state has to pay for use of the body to the last farthing, is what Holy Mother said. So karma is one of the 5-fold aspects of Maya. Name, form, time, space. Nimitta, it's called, cause and effect. So this means, as I say, the water has already run under the bridge. You're already behind the 8 ball. When you come to the body, mind mechanism, forgetful, there's a very good chance that you're not going to remember your past lifetimes by the billions. What did he just say here? It's very hard to attain that in this world. Very hard to attain a birth like that in this world, because you'll get your memory back by your father and mother, who are realized householder rishis, telling you that you had many births. Who's ever heard that? My parents never told me that here in this day and age. They had not an inkling about rebirth. They didn't even consider it as a possibility. It didn't interest them. Certainly the church wasn't going to tell them if they even went there. And science was a whole other trajectory completely, obsessed with the physical level of things alone and knowing nothing about heaven. By the way, heaven is your dreams. That's a place you go to in your mind. This place, according to the teachings, is in your mind. These rooms, these houses, this land, this island I'm on, that continent you're on, those are in the mind. That's where they exist first, and preeminently they exist there. And that's why they go away tonight in deep sleep, and why they go away in samadhi, and they'll disappear in your so-called death too, when your body-mind mechanism forgets this lifetime and is reborn again next time, forgetful of its previous lifetimes, and still not living in the present moment even. Because if you remember in one lifetime, the Buddhists say, of maybe 3 lifetimes of seeking, you remember your true nature, then you've had a conscious death. And that means a return to this path of the sun. You see that Krishna calls it in the Gita, with full remembrance of everything you learned as a Buddhist practitioner in your previous life. You don't forget everything, just like my teacher is not going to forget the Bhagavad Gita at 90. It's ingrained in his head. It's ingrained not only in Sanskrit, it's ingrained in English. It's ingrained not only in Sanskrit and English, it's ingrained in practice. And it's also ingrained in the soul. That's the ancient scripture of India, Bhagavad Gita. It's there for good. It's declaring the absolute truth all the time, but it's inferring relativity. So this is what Sri Ramakrishna called holding 2 ideals at once. If you can hold the formless reality of Brahman, and Brahman with attributes, that is Ishvara, the great realized souls, the gods, the goddesses, because Krishna says in the Gita, make these offerings to the gods and the goddesses, and then they will help you remember. You see, right now, they're all around you, but you're not remembering them. You're just looking at objects. You don't see the god or goddess of water, or of nature, or of ether, or of good fortune, or of bad fortune. So all of this is poor recall, or failed recall in this case. So I think I've started us out that way on purpose. Let's look then at this chart that will give us a good idea of what we're talking about when we want to look at retentive memory. So you can see it's pretty much named after this seminar, The Role of Mind and Memory in Rebirth, or subtitled, Developing a Conscious Retentive Memory, which is what we need to do, so that so much will come back to us. All the wisdom that is within you, the father of yoga says, all knowledge is already within you. It's like Jesus saying, the kingdoms of heaven are within you. You already know all this. And now you have placed yourself in a body, in a form, giving yourself a name based on certain cause and effect that's brought you here in these locations. So what is this incarnating? It's the body-mind mechanism with its impressions. Where is it incarnating? In heaven, earth, and hell. That is in these 3 worlds. And why is it doing that? That I'm not going to try and explain in one sentence. We're going to look at it. So the quote up here from Swami Vivekananda is very beautiful in this way. Greater help must be given to those whose nature has not been endowed with acute intellect and divine memory from birth. Boy, does that hit the nail on the head. See, so Vivekananda is walking around East and West, India and America, and parts of Europe and so forth, saying so many great teachings. But if you were listening, you'd cull one sentence out, and that would put all your doubts about rebirth to death. That is, that your divine memory is not in a very facile and ready state yet, that you've forgotten so much, but basically you've forgotten the most important thing, which is your very self. You think you're an ego now. You think you're a body. You think you're an intellect. But you're not. You never were. You're always the Atman. And that's the eternal truth of the matter. So let's read this again. Greater help must be given to those whose nature has not been endowed with acute intellect and divine memory from birth. So it infers that there are beings around who have been endowed with acute intelligence and divine memory. And we just read some of the words of one of those right here in the Gita. Sri Krishna has attested straight in the face of the war and to Arjuna that he is one of those beings who remembers all his lifetimes, and that he knows himself to be Atman, ever free and never bound. So good to start off with the great words of Sri Krishna and with Swami Vivekananda. Now, the basic outlay of this chart you can see is just a mind, a head, and some beings looking on from within that mind. And there in the third eye region is this, what we really want to get to is this daily remembrance of Brahman. See, what are the solutions? In the simplest way is to read the scriptures, meditate on Brahman, do your worship, and serve God in living beings. It sounds like the 4 yogas, right? So you've got Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Raja Yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga. So these 4 yogas are helping you keep your resilient memory present in the moment for this lifetime, so that you're going to impress upon your mind all the things you learned here when you worshipped, when you practiced, when you meditate, and when you did selfless service. All those things should now become your property. They should be impressed upon the mind. If you have any samskaras at all, it should be of practice and samadhi. That's how Father of Yoga would put it. So this is all put together here in this third eye region, which is called daily remembrance of Brahman. And there's the retentive memory, that jewel in the middle of it all. There's a part of your memory that will secure that inside of your mind and will base it on the great mind and on the great souls that you worship. In other words, as we chanted at the beginning of this class, the Divine Mother herself will put a fence around that young tree of your memory. That's how it's sung in India by Ram Prasad. You must fence the young sapling around with the fence of the mantra, so that this forgetfulness called cows and elephants coming at you will not tear this sapling down before it can grow to a full-size tree. Then you could tie an elephant too, and it wouldn't be any problem. So Sri Ramakrishna gives us ways of thinking about this retentive memory and how to keep it sacred. Below you can see, and I'm just giving the outlay of the chart here, pure mind and pure awareness on either side. They're really the same thing, and you could talk about them in terms of pure mind means that's that antakarna that's been made pure by practice. Pure awareness is the underlying substratum of it all. Now let's look up here quickly to a condensation of this other chart by reading what Smriti is all about. I want to take the forgetfulness aspect first. And that's basically, mind is given to random thoughts. Patanjali calls that scattered mind, or vikshipta, kshipta too, or even mudha is a kind of dull mind. But scattered mind, if that becomes a habit, then there's no focus. Like, say, the focus that your practice of the 4 yogas has given you day to day, then the mind tends to wander all the time, and it begins to brood. And of course, we know lots of teachings about the road to ruination in the Gita and other teachings from the scriptures that describe that. We looked at poor memory at the second class of our last series in one of those charts. So if the mind is given to random thoughts, that's weakening the fabric of your memory. Then mind fails to learn to concentrate in the present life. So its opportunity right now is to master the 6th limb of yoga, concentration. It can't do that until pratyahara is mastered, and it can't do that until it learns to sit and breathe. And it can't do that until it gets good food, and so forth, back to the very foundation of your practice. But here, in terms of the direct cause of forgetfulness of memory, that's simply put, lack of ability to concentrate. You'll see that in young people, in young souls when they're born. Some of them can concentrate, some can't. Some saying, this is too hard, I can't do it in school. Others are saying, I can do that easily. So this ability to concentrate is a mastery of a very powerful principle in yoga called dharana, or the ability to concentrate the mind on anything that it wills or wants to understand. For instance, let's see, so a great musician, which I'm familiar with some of them. So they would, at a very early life, pick up the instrument and would have such an easy time mastering it compared to someone standing by or somebody who is trying to master it for the first time. So it's pretty obvious, and I saw this even in my own family, that somebody can become a very advanced musician in a few years and play beautifully and masterfully. And another person in the same family line, could become just an adequate musician, and would take them a long time even to get that far. So this is all based upon what we will look on later, called samskaras. See how these impressions in the mind can be recalled by a concentrated mind, but not a mind that's given to random thoughts. So this restlessness, this brooding, has to be the tendency for that has to be destroyed. The third point here is mind enters a dark and vacuous state at the time of death. So we're really jumping quickly through birth, life, and death here. Birth, basically, born with a mind that has random thoughts. Then you try and gain concentration in life. The time of death, you haven't mastered that. So you go to unconscious death, not a conscious death, which is one of the teachings of Buddhism and Vedanta, but an unconscious death, and you forget everything. It's wiped away. We'll look at that closer in this other chart. It's called souls coming back and forth through the curtain of nations, and how the curtain of nations strips their memory of their past lifetime from them when they go to a so-called heaven. But when they come back and their karma brings them back to earth, then they come back forgetful of both heaven and earth. And therefore, people think, oh, we're starting over here. The mind has been wiped clean. But there are many impressions in the mind that are causing this. And this very thing about vacuous mind, scattered mind, does not happen to the realized souls. Sri Krishna is not standing on a battlefield in front of Arjuna saying, oh, I really can't remember what to tell you. You see, I forgot. He knows everything to say to Arjuna. So this is an example of a soul who's got his memory, his divine memory, Daiva Smriti, fully intact, and knows what to say at every juncture, and can even anticipate the questions and give the truth so that people can ponder it and themselves return to the state of Daiva Smriti. The penultimate one here is the transmigrating mental complex forgets its past lifetime at birth. So in the next birth, it forgets. So transmigrating mental complex. Please, anyone who's going to ask me a question later today or tomorrow or soon, what is it that reincarnates? Please memorize those three words. Transmigrating mental complex. That's the fourfold mind. And in it, of course, it's going to need a body and 5 senses and 5 elements and the worlds. We'll look at that as far as why it incarnates there and how it incarnates there and how it can stop that transmigration from happening in ignorance. Transmigrating mental complex. It's fourfold. Manas, Chitta, Buddhi, and Ahamkara. My students should know these well already. Put them together into a fourfold complex and just watch that thing mow through the worlds, you see. It eats through the worlds. It eats the green. It eats everything else in its way. And it comes and goes, and it comes and goes again, and returns again. We want to look towards that freedom for which it will never return here again. It's called moksha. The last point here, which is, again, concentrating this down from something we're going to look at later, says, due to pursuit of matter, money, and pleasure, the soul forgets God. So you can see how this is put in terms of a birth, a young life, a time of death, the moving to a different world and then coming back to the earth and being put off again by ancestors who have no divine memory themselves in a culture like ours, a Western hemisphere of the country that has forgot all about rebirth and reincarnation, and it's been replaced by creation theory or evolutionary science, and has no idea that there is a soul that's even transmigrating or not. It's almost futile to ask the question, what is it that transmigrates? For most people, it's nothing, because they don't even believe in transmigration. But for the soul who is searching for the truth, this is a very important question. Where was I before? And where will I be then? That's how Holy Mother used to put it. She'd say, you should ask yourself, you should say, I have parents, you see, and where were you before your parents? And where will you be after they pass? So you have this source in which you can connect to that's purely rational and makes very good sense. And it also goes deep into what's called philosophy. It also makes a lot of sense out of otherwise uncertain psychology. Yoga psychology puts this into perspective. Western psychology is still fumbling. So that was a quick run through of a condensation of a chart we'll look at next week called Smriti, which is the dire effects part of it. But let's look at a condensation of the divine memory, so that we're putting someone like Arjuna and Krishna side by side, if we take them for our couple. Although I wouldn't say Arjuna is any slouch. He's very righteous, he's very attained, he has concentration in some things. But this art of yoga, the psychology of yoga, and this Advaita Vedanta is not given to many, even in the time of Krishna. So under Daiva Smriti there, then you can see, by dint of religious and spiritual experiences occurring in life due to practice, the soul remembers its past existences. So that's about as simply as I could put it in just one sentence that would take up 3 lines of this chart. By dint of religious and spiritual experiences occurring in life due to practice, the soul remembers its past existences. So nobody's practicing. Buddha in his time, 550 years before Jesus, looked and said, the rest of households is lack of practice. You're not doing your practices. He looked at the monasteries around. None of them were Buddhist yet either. He looked at the monasteries around. The rest of monasteries is lack of recitation of the scriptures. This rust that's in everything is rusting your memory, you see. So you can't remember anything except just what you're doing day to day. You're foraging, you're gathering, you're consuming, and that's all you do. It's a gray little study of life, Vivekananda said when he was here. He couldn't believe that we were so obsessed with it, when the wonders of the spirit and the bliss of the self were there for the taking. And there we were. Who could explain it? Next, I could keep hammering at that one. So do your religious and spiritual practices. Study religion and do your spiritual practices given by the Guru all your life, and don't give them up, because they will impress themselves on your mind and your retentive memory as you leave the body, and they will stand you in good stead when you have to come back, if you have to come back, to take on a better body and a higher mind. And it will also put to death all ignorance in the meantime. So you'll be sure and certain of the proof of truth as you exit the body. You won't be thinking like King Bharata of your pet deer when you die, or something like that. There's all sorts of cases when they bring forward about people thinking about, why are you thinking about that? You're about to go meet the Lord. So they're not saying, why are you thinking about that? You fear God. Why should you fear God? Your whole life has been a practice for death. Life is a rehearsal for death, Vivekananda said. So then when it comes to death, you're going to be afraid of it. You're about to see what you've been trying to see your whole life and haven't been able to because of all the impediments here, all the conditionings, all the past karmas, the society's problems, military, science, inept and inadequate education. All of those things are going to go away for you now. So that memory is going to play a big part of that. See, you're going to remember that this is the most important thing of all. Brahman is real, the world is not real. Putting a deeper spin on that one. Then, thenceforth, all lives are accompanied by worship of the highest deities and meditation on formless reality. Basically, you're a Jnana Bhakti meditator. You have at least 3 of these yogis under your grasp. You worship, and that means God with form. Everything here is with form, so you deify everything. But there's a formless reality called Ishvara that's between form and form as a gateway. So you're going to want to pay special attention to that friend in a higher place so that the gateway will open to the light of Brahman for you. So thenceforth means what? After you keep your practice going and gain these experiences of spiritual life, then all your lives thereafter will be accompanied by worship of the highest deities and meditation on formless reality. Then everything in relativity, including objects, reflect light and remind the soul of Brahman. That's seeing God in everything. So you'll have a lifetime where you will come back in that free state with your mind open and universal, and you'll be seeing everything reflect the light of Brahman. You could see that, for instance, in Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Then, how about personality-wise, or individuals? Near and dear souls are recognized as eternal companions from lifetime to lifetime. We have this fact corroborated by Holy Mother. Those who love each other and who love the Lord, love each other in the Lord, they're companions from lifetime to lifetime. So she's also said that. So all of those points powerful, aren't they? We could spend a lot of time on each one of them. Each one's a retreat. But we want to at least finish this cover chart and maybe go on to this question of what is it that transmigrates or reincarnates. So what I did here in the thinking on this chart was, how about some one-liners, that are really powerful, that just infer not only the truth of the relative law of reincarnation, but coming from a realized state. So really at the head of this is Holy Mother's saying. She says, to those who remember by virtue of great merit that all of this is Maya's play, and believe that God alone is the only reality, should I not offer a little help and encouragement? So never forget, you have a mother. So they remember by dint of great merit that all of this is Maya's play. That's a profound way of saying what we've been trying to say here really for the last hour or so. But the key word is remember. Those who remember by dint of great merit that all this is Maya's play, then it answers the question already. The soul never reincarnates. It's the body-mind mechanism in nature that's doing all that. And that's one of the slokas in the Gita. All activity, all karma takes place in nature, Arjuna, not in you. The you they mean is this witness consciousness that's watching these many births and deaths go by. Birth, life, death, rebirth. See? Until finally it's had enough of that. See? Now this cycle, I'm going to put it to the end. O architect, of Maya, I have finally seen you. Now I will not build any more homes. I will not build homes of wood and stone. I will not build homes of wood. I will not build homes of wise conception. That's mental dreaming. So that's how Buddha put it in the Dhammapada. When he had his great experience of nirvana under the bo tree, he came back and he saw the architect. In fact, one of these quotes, we can start with it right there. He says, recalling my countless births and deaths, I discovered I was architect of this body, cathedral. So I snapped its rafters and sundered its ridgepole, and my mind swiftly entered dissolution, nirvana, in other words. And then he came out of nirvana to tell others about it. Beautiful. You can see that snapping the chains of birth and death, how thoughts like that have come even into our modern times in the Ramakrishna order. And a great song that Vivekananda wrote about, oh, snapper of this world's chains. You probably sang it or heard it. So this was all the way back to Lord Buddha talking about this. So we took that one first as we were led to. Let's go back to the first of these great quotes. I have received a command from the mother of the universe that death must die. So death itself has to be put to death. As I said, my teacher used to say that, put death in its own grave. So this is Ram Prasad singing one of his great devotional wisdom songs, we call them, and translated by our founder, Lex Hixon. Peace and blessings be upon him. So I have received a command from the mother of the universe that death must die. So he went into his meditations, he worshiped Divine Mother. Divine Mother appeared to him. I remember thinking back on the Upanishads we've been studying, the Annapurna Upanishad and others, how Divine Mother appears to certain seers when they concentrate on her their whole life. So that happened to Ram Prasad too. And what did he get from her? Well, you've still got belief that death is real, and it's not. I must tell you, you're eternal. You're not mortal, you're immortal. You're not finite, you're infinite. You're not a sinner, you're divine. See, remember my teacher looking at us and saying that to us, pleading almost with us to believe this, to have faith in it, to prove it too. Now, another great songwriter says, O mind that constantly forgets divine reality, the one who constantly remembers the mother experiences no fear when facing the dreadful expanse of universal suffering. So this river of souls that's moving on and on. So remembering the mother is there at the foundation of everything, like when we sing, Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Chaitaneti Abhidhyate Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Chaya Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Smriti Rupena Samstita Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Samstita Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Om Chiti rupena ya kritsnam etat vyapya stitha jagat. Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. All slokas out of the Chandi, the scripture on the Divine Mother, which says, O great goddess of the universe, existing as shadow play in the hearts and minds of all beings. Chaya. It's shadow play, all of this. we offer our eternal salutations unto thee. O great Mother of the universe, existing in the hearts and minds of all beings as Buddhi, intellect, we offer our salutations to thee. O great Mother of the worlds, existing in the hearts and minds of all beings as Smriti, memory, we offer our salutations ever unto thee. And on with various qualities. She exists in the hearts and minds of all beings as shadow play, as intelligence, as memory. And so we go to her and say, awaken me, O Mother, from this dream of life and death, and show me the secret of eternal life, and reach me through and through with thy sweet and benign presence. So say it or sing it. It both delivers the message in no uncertain terms. To put it in Vivekananda's words, as we throw another great saying at us, this thirst for life forever quench, it drags from birth to death and death to birth of soul. They conquer all who conquer self. Know this and never yield. Say Om Tat Sat Om would be the final words to that one verse. So this thirst for life forever quench. So this is part of the why beings are reincarnating. What is it that's reincarnating? The body-mind mechanism. Why is it reincarnating? Because of its impressions from last lifetimes and its inability to concentrate on reality. Where is it reincarnating? In all the worlds inside of the mind. So quench this thirst for birth and death, because it drags the soul from this place to that place. When the soul is stationary, when the soul is immobile, when the soul is unmoving, it doesn't need to go anywhere because it's all pervasive. So just one line out of my own memory of things I've learned and have inspired me for all these many 50 or 60 years that I've, in this lifetime alone, that I've worked on recalling these teachings and sharing with others. These are some of the things I thought about when I thought, what do I do with the other lower quarter of this chart? See, what do I put there? How can we be more convincing with this? So there's what I was just chanting. O Divine Mother, as resilient, retentive memory, you exist in the hearts and minds of all beings. Let's go to an Advaitist, see if you can remember who I mean. Death I have none, for never a birth had I, nor father, nor mother, nor friend, nor companion. So you probably recognize that as Na mrityur na shanka, na me jati beda, pita naiva me naiva, mata majanma, chirananda rupaha, shivoham shivoham. Of course, Shankara in his Nirvana Shatakam, Shatakam means six, is 6 verses on Nirvana, on this state that is beyond birth and death. That's beyond transmigration. It's beyond transformation. It's pure transcendence. And then I already read Lord Buddha's great quote, realizing my countless births and deaths, I discovered I was the architect of this body cathedral. I snapped its rafters and sundered its ridgepole, and my mind swiftly entered dissolution. And then we look towards Vashishta for this one. Both spider and prey are caught in the self-spun web of forgiveness. By cutting through its sticky strands, my timeless memory returned to me, and I reached the farthest shore, enlightenment. So we have wrapped up that chart in one fell swoop. and underscored it all with these great sayings by different beings. Let's move. What is it that transmigrates? We have several old war horses about the body-mind mechanism, but we don't pull this one up that often. There you see the 5 sheaths and their properties. And this is from Shankar's Vivekachudamani. These are called upadis. My teacher used to speak about them at all. And he would even put the word upadi into terms of cultures and races and so forth. If we look at this under the heading of the question, what is it that transmigrates? What is it that incarnates? It's not like we have to overlook the fact that there's this sexless self. Whose father he, whose son, whose mother, whose friend, whose foe is he who is but one. The self is all in all. None else exists. You have to keep that Advaita Vedanta first and foremost in your mind. Brahman is real, the world is unreal, or Brahman is the changeless principle. Everything else changes around it, or within it, or underneath it, or over it, or behind it. And you keep this one non-dual presence first and foremost. Then you look at this 5-fold complex. It's like having a diamond and putting 5 coverings over it. The diamond's the Atman, then there's the ego, then there's the intelligence, then there's the thoughts, then there's the energy called prana, and then there's flesh, matter, the body. So all 5 of these get dissolved and reduced or torn away, strip the wrappings off the gift, and then there's the Atman shining as it always was, just covered like clouds over the sun. The sun never disappears. They're just clouds covering it, Vivekananda said. So souls are like the sun, their Atman is the sun. And to the degree to which these clouds are thick, then they might not ever see the sun for a long time, like say where some of you are in Portland, Oregon in the winter. So you never see the sun when it comes out. You say, what's that orb in the sky? I haven't seen that for a while. So that's the forgetfulness of the son of the Atman, being covered over by the thickness of the clouds of forgetfulness. Smriti, as we'll look at next week. So if you are kicking yourself for not understanding this non-dual philosophy, you're trying to dig yourself out from under the conditionings of ages of what your ancestors taught or didn't teach you, and what irreligion foisted upon you, that then you could probably emphasize with Shankara's pupil here. He says, I do not understand what you just told me. You ask me to do away with these 5 sheaths, and when I do, I see nothing, but the void remains. What is to be known there? Teacher, if you can do away with these 5 sheaths through the instructions of the scriptures, what remains? It is the witness consciousness, the Atman, thine own self. So it takes a while to strip away the coverings off the gift, but then you have to focus on the gift and forget about the coverings. People are recalling the coverings. Oh, I did away with that. I wish I had it again. And this is called samskaras. We'll look at that maybe next week. It's not time today. It's also called, and it causes forgetfulness. These conditionings, they call it in Buddhism. So you can see here 5 layers. And when we go through these quickly, you can see that this is what is transmigrating. See what's going from birth to death and death to birth, what's getting drug along under the overall heading of the mind. And remember what we've just said, how the mind in a perfectly divine state of memory looks upon this as a cosmic play, and it can engage and disengage at will. It can attach and detach at will. it associates with these 5 sheaths. It never identifies with them. So keep these helpful sayings in mind. Body sheath is transformation of food, lives by food, dies without it. Being skin, bone, flesh, marrow, etc., it cannot be the Atman because it changes, and Atman's unchanging. It is insentient, an object of the senses, and is therefore a non-enjoyer. It is material, undergoes change, borrows its life, has various attributes, and is controlled, that is, by another force. It has a cause, and itself causes ignorance and identification with all that's unreal. Basically, a good rundown of the downside of this body. So that's called the Annamaya Kosha. That's going to be necessary. It'll be the last thing to be produced from the ego, as you can tell by the 24 cosmic principles and how everything steps down into evolution, but then has to involve too. Pranamaya Kosha, the sheath of energy, can be put in this way. It consists of 5 organs of action and 5 vital forces. Dwelling in and permeating the Annamaya Kosha, that is the body, it engages beings and works. It moves like the wind inside and out, so it is not immutable like the Atman. It has no knowledge of its own, is insentient, and knows no difference between good and bad. Like the hand controlled by the prana can kill or it can stroke. So it can give pain or it can give pleasure. The prana itself sees no difference between one act and another. So it has to be informed by a higher force. So the prana in the body is doing vicious acts, then that discrimination is missing. And that discrimination has gone missing because the moral laws, the yamas and yamas have, or put it in this way, the 10 commandments and so forth, have been forgotten, and they're not being constantly renewed in the memory. And that practice is missing. The mind sheath consists of feeling, organs of feeling, senses, and the mind. It infills the other 2 sheaths, that is, energy and body, and thinks itself separate from others. It depends on the 5 senses for its knowledge, and is thus limited. It retains its existence and interest via sense life, objects, and desire. It doesn't have any higher leanings in that way then, unless it's awakened. It is the very home of ignorance and the cause of all bondage. That's the mind we're talking about, Mano Maya Kosha. It causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power. So this is something to be watched, this mind in ignorance particularly, something to be very cautious of. It's very powerful, as we can see by all the beings that have come here with a mind to engage in domination of the world and all the suffering that's happened because of it. So you can, on one side, see how the mind is engaged in menial and base things. On the other side, stand back and look at its great power. It causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power, like in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It binds the soul to body and objects via attachment and frees it from them via non-attachment. So it has that facility to cease its identification with the unreal and only associate with it, and then identify fully with the real. That's the awakened mind. That's what we're talking about in terms of the import of memory. It binds the soul to body and objects via attachment, frees them via non-attachment, gets itself purified by resort to discrimination and detachment / renunciation. It deludes itself by creating objects, varieties, distinctions, qualities, and the belief in them. That's a good one. All of this variegations of Maya, we talked about that at the beginning of the class. Remember when we were talking about the scattered mind. The scattered mind itself creates objects, varieties, distinctions, and qualities, and then is convincing in having you believe in them. It undergoes change, has a beginning and an end, suffers pain. It is not the seer. You see, we would look back on this chart we were just looking at towards pure mind, then you're getting towards the seer, or what we call witness consciousness, then you're getting towards the seer. But it's got so many conditionings in the way. We're talking about 5 major ones here when we talk about sheaths, overlays, conditionings, koshas, upadis. India is well in knowledge about what it is that's dragging the soul from birth to death and death to birth. It's this 5-fold complex, basically rooted in the mind. But the mind has also higher reaches. There's the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of intellect or intelligence. It consists of the buddhi, that is, that which gathers knowledge, the organs of feeling and the sense of I am the doer. It reflects consciousness, but is a transformation of nature, prakriti. It works, feels, and says, I am the doer, the seer, engaging in works and enjoying their results. It holds within it the 3 states of consciousness and pleasure and pain. All of you probably know the 3 states of consciousness to be waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It is the upadi of the object, of the Atman, and very near to it, and reflects it best. So of all the 5 sheaths, the intellect is closest to the Atman and reflects its light the best. That's why if you become the Buddha, if you awaken the buddhi, this refined intelligence can pierce through all of these other defects and limitations and manifests itself as pure intelligence. Therefore, you would sing Ya Devi Sarvbhuteshu Jnana Rupena Samstita, or other words for intelligence. The Atman uses mind and intellect for its appearances. So mind and intellect are getting deep into the core of closer and closer to the Atman, but they're still coverings. They're so complex as to be able to convince the soul to go from birth to life to death to rebirth. And this is going on in, well, we'll get to that, in the various worlds called heaven, earth, and hell, or chakras, or dvipas, or bardos, or I have several charts I can show you about that. That'll be next week's question. Try it this week. We're looking at divine memory. We're also looking at what is it that incarnates, so we can pre-answer that question before we get to this problem of what's caused our dull memory. And so we'll look at where it incarnates next week. Then there's the Anandamaya Kosha, the sheath of bliss. It is a reflection of bliss, but is reflected in the tamas of Maya, says Shankara. It appears and is felt only in favorable conditions and circumstances. So I've often said it's probably pretty easy to say that there's this deluded ego, and then there's this real ego or real self, and then there's a true self. So one is this deluded ego, which is the prideful ahamkara. And then there's, maybe you could say, the purusha. This is the real self, but it's still individualized and not fully awakened. And then there's the Atman, you see, that's far beyond both. So you could say that there are levels to this ego, this sheath of bliss. And it sort of infers that here when the true ego comes forward only in favorable conditions. It has a cause, for it requires good actions to be operative. It is not to be mistaken for the Atman, as it is dependent on something else. It is experienced in deep sleep, glimpsed in waking dreaming, upon the fulfillment of desires. So we experience that more pure ego in deep sleep. And in waking dreaming, it only occurs to us once in a while. Otherwise, the ahamkara, the gross ego, is covering everything and causing us to say, I, me, and mine. This is mine. This I will get today. That I'll get tomorrow. I will own everything, as Krishna says in the Gita. And finally, it always remains with the body under the control of the gunas. So this fivefold complex is what transmigrates, and that's based upon the samskaras in it. So we'll look at that next week, because I think we probably run out of time. So we'll look at the samskaras in the human mind, because that's what makes it go from birth to death and death to birth. And where does it go? Into heaven. That is, into hell, earth, and heaven, into the different lokas. So we'll look about that, and we'll also look at this 7 different designations of what India has put forth in terms of where these heavens are, how they're gradated, and what kinds of access is given to them, and what are the qualifications it takes to enter them, like to go beyond Bhur, Bhuva, and Swaha. See the 3 worlds in the Gayatri, to go to this beyond the 3 lower chakras of transmigration to the heart chakra, for instance. That's what we can look at to answer these questions of why does it incarnate and where does it incarnate. So we're going to take these questions early, so that by the time we arrive at the middle of the 2nd and 3rd class, we can look at the more cosmic causes and individual causes of Smriti, why it is that we're still caught blindsided in each lifetime, and what we're going to have to do in order to awaken our divine memory in this lifetime and retain it as we enter into our first conscious passing from the body. Many ways in which we can look at that. One of them, I had thought that we could probably take a second look at the Shane meditation and the burning pillar meditation of Tibetan Buddhism, because that also has a lot to do with dissolving lower worlds and entering into this higher state, which would be called Buddha nature in that case. So here we've spent an hour and a half at the first class of this, the role of mind and memory in the process of rebirth, and very much connected to enlightenment and awakening. So may we see with eyes what is good and spiritual, hear with ears what is noble and uplifting, and may we, while worshiping the Lord and Mother of the universe, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.